We're very pleased to have with us former Senator Bob Graham, who's co-chairman of the Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism. Bob, thank you for being on with us.
Fred, well, thank you for the invitation. Good to be back in touch with you, even though by long distance.
Well, I'm sure that you will agree with me that there is life after the Senate. What do you think about it?
There certainly is. I'm having some of the best times of my life right now.
Well, I can say the same thing. You're in Florida today?
I am in Miami Lakes, Florida. Yep.
Well, good for you. Well, you're doing some very important work here, Bob. Your commission was started in '07, and last December issued a report that an attack involving a weapon of mass destruction was likely to occur somewhere in the world unless we did certain things by 2013. Does that analysis still stand?
Yes, and it's been confirmed by the Director of National Intelligence publicly, and I can tell you it's been confirmed privately by a number of other of the federal government's organizations whose job it is to stay on top of the threats that we face.
Bob, have you broken it down either publicly or otherwise in terms of potential source for that threat? Now that we have these nation states trying to develop weapons of mass destruction, we have non-state actors and terrorists around the world, and we have these homegrown people here who are trying to get their hands on whatever they can. How do you? Is it all of the above?
Yeah, Fred, the answer is what we said was that it was more likely that the form of the attack would be with a biological weapon rather than a nuclear weapon. We didn't go further to put a relative percentage on whether it would be an attack in the United States or someplace else on the earth. But we do know that our principal adversaries have the United States as the bullseye of their target.
And that hasn't changed for some time, has it?
No. The intent, for instance, Al-Qaeda had a very active biological weapons program in Kandahar in Afghanistan up until the time we invaded that country in October of '01 and discovered it. And we have no reason to believe that they are not continuing their desire to either be able to develop a program on their own or buy or steal it from somebody else.
Bob, why is it that you conclude that the most likely kind of attack would be a biological one, and if so, why hasn't that gotten at least more public discussion than it has?
Well, the second question is maybe what we're going to be talking about, I hope, before this interview is over. But why we think that it's the more likely is because a nuclear weapon is first a very complicated piece of technology. There are only a relatively few places in the world that have the capability of developing such a weapon. We hope that we know where those places are, and to the extent possible, have either developed lockdown security measures or close surveillance of those sites. On the other hand, biological is everywhere. Anthrax, as an example, and many people think it's the most likely form of a biological attack, is available in nature through the carcasses of animals. It's relatively easy to manipulate, and increasingly we think our adversaries are learning how to distribute it. As an example, we had a closed briefing within the last couple of weeks talking about the possibility of an attack in a major American city using a liquid slurry of anthrax in the back of a pickup truck with a fogging device which releases an almost invisible film and could infect literally millions of people in a 24-hour period.
I'm sorry that we've got such limited time. What should we be doing in 30 seconds if we could, Bob?
Okay, Fred, the strategy we need to have is a deterrent by preparation. We need to be the best prepared nation in the world. That's the best guarantee that we'd have that we won't be attacked. And we're concerned that we're not doing enough now to develop that preparation for an attack, both to avoid the attack and, should it come, be able to reduce the impact.
Thank you, Bob.
The Fred Thompson Show on Westwood One. Where common sense meets conservative talk. It's the Fred Thompson Show.
We've been talking to former Senator Bob Graham of Florida, and he's the co-chairman of the Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism. He's agreed to stay with us for a few more minutes because the subject we're talking about is so important. They have delivered a report now that tells us that we have a problem. We have a problem with regard to potential nuclear attack with weapons of mass destruction, and that if we don't take the proper steps, it's more likely than not that it will happen. And Bob was just telling us that the biggest threat, in all probability, is from a biological attack. I had asked him what we should do, and we were talking about preparation and so forth, and a large part of that has to do with vaccines, doesn't it, Bob?
So I use the analogy of a chain, and each link has to be strong. You got to know if you're under attack, which means you have to have a system of quickly collecting information, either technically through various technologies that would detect biological materials in the air, or by having first responders like hospital emergency rooms call into a central source. Number two, you've got to have the warehouse of vaccines ready to use, and that, we think, is the big issue today. We're like we are with swine flu, except much worse, deficient in terms of having the vaccines, the therapeutics that we're going to need, and we believe we don't have any time to waste getting them. And then finally, you have to have a distribution system. It's not going to be easy in the midst of a biological, even more in a nuclear attack, to be able to get the drugs that infected people will need in order to reduce the fatality level of a attack, particularly an attack with biological weapons.
Bob, you mentioned the difficulties that we're having with H1N1 now, and of course we've got a vaccine issue here in terms of short supplies and all. Do you see that as possibly the same an example of the same sort of difficulty that we would have in a natural disaster? Of course, a biological attack would be so much greater.
Well, the answer is no. It's just a sort of an early signal. First, we've had over a year to get ready for the swine flu, and we still are behind the curve. We're going to have a few minutes after a biological attack to start the process of getting therapeutics to the people who've been affected. The estimate that we've gotten is that about 20% of the people who are exposed, for instance, to anthrax will die unless they have these therapeutics within 72 hours. So the clock will be ticking at a very fast pace to get those materials out.
Well, where are we as a government in terms of preparation there?
Well, I think we are woefully behind in terms of first developing the most effective vaccines that can be used against the 6 or 8 major likely pathogens that a terrorist would use in making a biological weapon, and then once we have the material developed in the laboratory, we've got to get it produced in order to be in warehouses ready to be accessed on a very short time frame.
I recall reading where there was some disagreement or discussion concerning, I believe it was called Project BioShield, in terms of the budgeting for that.
Well,
what is it, and what is the nature of the discussion?
There are two related programs. One is called BioShield, and the other one is called BARDA, and they have two objectives. One is to do the laboratory development of the most effective vaccines against things like the plague, Ebola, anthrax, and then second, once we've determined we've got it, then to be able to produce it in large enough quantities to be available in the event of an attack. The scientists that have briefed us say that we should be investing somewhat over $3 billion a year for the next 5 years, and we could anticipate that we would have enough vaccines to cover 90% of the people who would be exposed to one of these biological attacks. The current budget is $300 million. Now, $300 million is a lot of money, but it's 1/10 of what we've been advised is necessary to reach that goal of an adequate supply in 5 years.
Is this a White House issue, or is it a Congress issue?
It's
or what?
both. The White House is recommending $305 million for this program. We think that's 1/10 of what it needs to be, and the Congress is debating whether to accept that number. Some people even want to cut that number lower, or plus up to what we think would be a reasonable number for the security of the American people.
Bob, I'm afraid it's another case of short-sightedness that we see in this town all the time. You know, just spend the money on what's right there in front of us.
But, and Fred, some people say, well, you're going to spend all this money and then we don't have a biological attack. It's all been wasted. Our position is the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about that will give us early notification, will have the vaccines accessible, and be able to distribute it inside a 3-day period are the same kind of capabilities that you would want to have if we had an attack not by a mad human, but by nature. And we're seeing today the consequences of not having those capabilities with the swine flu. So we think it's an investment in our protection from both man and nature's potential evil assaults at the American people through biological means.
Bob, thank you for the work you're doing and bringing this to the attention of the American people, and I appreciate you being with us today.
Fred, thank you very much.
All right.
Best wishes to you,
Yeah,
old pal.
You too. Thank you.